In this video, we're going to be going into a full product tutorial and demo for Zoho Projects, covering everything from the application overview to the specifics of how a project is set up. Then we're going to jump into project templates and look at some task dependencies and getting your Gantt chart all lined up. Then last but not least, we're going to bring it home with some of the workflow and automation tools in the backend settings. But before I jump in, I do want to ask, if you find this video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. Leave us a comment with any feedback, questions, and video requests. And as always, head on over to Zenatta.com and click on Book a Meeting if you'd like to chat about how we can help on your Zoho installation. So without any further ado, let's jump right on into the app. As always, I'm going to start with just kind of an overview. What's on the screen? What can we expect as we dive in? So inside of Zoho Projects, you're going to start on the home page here. I would like to direct you over to this left-hand bar. These are essentially all of your big picture categories and components of the application, right? So I've got my home page. I've got some specific reports that I can dive into in terms of, workload tracking, planned versus actual, and then some more granular kind of breakdown reports. We've then got our full list of projects. Right now, I don't have any. I'll create one in just a moment. We've also got collaboration. This is where you're going to get a feed of all activity that's going on each project, whether those are like comments or updates, related activities. We can check on the calendar, right? So if we want to have a shared calendar with all of our team, and then we can actually connect in our chat tool, oftentimes Zoho Click, to embed into the collaboration tab as well. Then under overview, these are like your lists, right? So my list of tasks, my list of issues, my list of milestones, timesheets, and expenses. All of these, again, being populated across many different projects and showing inside of one consolidated space. So with that kind of initial overview in mind, let's go ahead and create a project and kind of see where everything gets populated. So we're going to jump into creating project templates in just a little bit. What I'm going to do to get started is I'm just going to pick a template from one of their demos so that we can launch and jump in. So I'm going to click on Use Template under Software Development. That's what I'm choosing here, mostly just because that's what I'm most comfortable with. That's kind of the world that I live in. You do have a huge amount of different template options that you can take a look at. Now, with that data actually populated, let's go through each of our tabs one more time, right? So we can see on our homepage, we've got one active project with 35 open tasks, kind of giving me a breakdown of where everything is at a high level. I will highlight a lot of the time when you're using Zoho Projects, you're probably going to graduate out of using this homepage and some of these reports. And realistically, you'll want to plan on doing some work inside of Zoho Analytics just to kind of expand how you can slice and dice the data. Now, with this project being created, a lot of these reports become a little more intuitive, right? So we can kind of come in here and look at our workload report and see for a given user on May 1st, we have certain hours of work allocated to that particular person, right? So each of these are essentially a block of time that we're expected to do work. So if we were to come in here and look at this particular team member, we might see, hey, they're over or under allocated based on some of our planned future work. Plan versus actual, again, this kind of gets into the time logs when you're actually billing. And then, as I mentioned, you've got some of these just high-level reports for the rest of the categories. Jumping into our overview, this is really where things become more useful when you've got many different projects that have been launched. So if I'm a user, I might just be working on my task list from the top to the bottom, right? I don't need to focus in on a particular project. More, I need to focus in on what is the task with the most upcoming start date where I need to jump in. So here we can come in to see all of our tasks, all of our issues, all of our milestones, regardless of which project they actually happen to be associated with. Once you have some projects launched, down here at the bottom, you'll see the recent projects list. This is just where you can go to easily pick up where you left off on any recent project. Now, I'm going to give a quick overview of each of these sections that live inside of a project itself, right? So here I've selected into my project. I've got that name up here at the top. If I click on view, we can just see some of the additional info about this project. This is where you would come to set up any of your budgeting information. So of course, we can budget on a project basis, on a milestone basis, on a task basis, or on a user. And then within each of those, we can choose our billing method, which would be like a project hour, a staff hour, a task hour, or just like a fixed bid, fixed price project. Now, outside of our little pop-up window there, we have our dashboard. This is just a high-level summary, again, of what's going on with this project. These are not super customizable, so a lot of what you can do here is kind of add and remove widgets or rearrange widgets, but we can't really create new ones. Again, I always just do like to call out, you're very likely going to end up in something like Zoho Analytics for a lot of your reporting. Next up is the task list. So tasks can be grouped by milestone, by task list, or without any grouping. And then we can look at them within a bunch of different filters and categories, right? So all of my open tasks, all of my assigned tasks. I can also create custom views. Like I might want to have one where a task is not blocked, right, by a previous predecessor that's not completed, right? So we can come in here and create any of those custom views that we need. And then we can visualize these either as a list, like we're seeing now, a Gantt chart where I'm able to kind of forecast tasks over time, right? So based on my start date and due date, I've plotted this into my Gantt chart. Or I can view tasks based on a Kanban board, just based on status and where they're at in our development life cycle. Under reports, you're going to get the same type of reports I was showing you at the reports tab, but just for this particular project. Documents is a great one. So inside of the Documents tab, you can upload and manage documents directly within Zoho Projects. You can integrate this as well into something like Zoho WorkDrive. I strongly recommend you do. In that case, a team folder gets created for each and every project, and you can manage your documents in the cloud related to this individual project record. Milestones are essentially our phases. We're going to come back to this one when we get into the breakdown of data inside of a project. Timesheets are where we can go to log all of our time. So let's say I've got a task and I'm going to start working on it. I'm going to open this up in our list view. I can actually log my time a few different ways. So I can just click on Start Timer here for a particular task. And now I'm going to go work on it, right? Once I'm done, I come back in and I click Stop. Now this one's under 30 seconds, so it's going to discard it. That's totally fine. So I can use the timer, or I can come in and log hours against a particular task, right? So I can say, hey, I started this at, 4 a.m. and I finished at, 4:45 a.m. I was up early today. Now I'm going to add this and we'll see that I have this billable time entry logged against my task for ongoing time tracking, right? And then over time, what you're realistically going to do is kind of compare your logged hours to your work hours, which would be like my estimate, right? So I assume I'm going to work, let's say 1 total hour on this. If I were to work 45 minutes and then get it done, I would be ahead of schedule, right? So, and again, when we get into the project templates, I'll talk a little bit more about work hours and kind of what those mean and how to set them, because realistically, you're going to do most of that at the template level. Over here to the right, we do have a couple of our finance integrations, so we can be doing our invoicing and expensing directly through Zoho Projects using the books integration. Issues are essentially a thing that's gone wrong, generally in relation to a particular task that's created a stuck point or a block point, right? So in the world of software development, this might be a bug. In the world of property development, this might be an unexpected pipe, right? And now we're like, hey, we can't complete this task to drill the hole because there's this pipe that's running through it. We have an issue. We need to change something. Lastly, I do like to highlight here just in our overview, the users tab. This is a common mistake. So people who are set up as an admin or a manager inside of Zoho Projects are going to be added as a user to all projects by default. When you have just a normal standard user, you are going to need to add them to Zoho Projects and to each project individually, or by using some type of workflow rule wherever you want them to be able to take a task. We hear this all the time. Someone comes into our, a client meeting with us. They're like, hey, I've got 20 users. They're all inside of Zoho Projects. Why can't I set John as the owner of a task? And we go, hey, is he a user of the project? Because he's a user of the app, but he also needs to be a user within the individual project. So I always like to highlight that. Just it's a common stuck point. You're not crazy if you've been stuck there before. It's kind of unintuitive, but Once you get the hang of it, the value is you don't need every user to be looking at every project all the time, right? So you can just associate them to the projects that are actually relevant for them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to jump into creating a project template. And really our goal here is to dive into, one, the data structure of a project, essentially our milestone to task list to task. Two, we're going to be looking at time allocation and budgeting because that does become a really important part of how projects get used. And then three, we're going to dive into task dependencies. And building out a template together is really just the best way to do that. So to start this process, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the projects tab. I'm going to go into project templates. I'm going to click new template. Going to give it a name. Now, one of the things you can do is clone a template from an existing project. So if you remember, when I came in here before and I did new project, we've got all of these existing templates, right? And so you might be going, hey, this manufacturing template is really close to what I need. How do I change it? Well, you can't change the template here, but you could surely launch it as a project and then create a template from that. So that's what I'm going to do here for my template is I'm actually going to grab it from our software development project, which again, I used their template for. I'm going to set this as a billing type. We're going to say it's billing based on project. Let's say we want to base it on our project hours. So our budgeted hours, let's say, is 100 and our cost budget is 20,000 or something, right? So our rate per hour would then be 200. Our cost per hour. This is where things get a little bit tricky in terms of language, right? So the rate per hour is what you're billing the client. Your cost per hour, let's say, would be like what it costs you. So I'm going to bill out 100 hours at 200 an hour for a total of 20,000 would be like my budget. And then within my cost, I can see what my margin essentially should be on this project. So this is going to spin for a second and create my project template. So I'll be right back when that is done. All right, so here we are inside of our new template. And step one, as promised, I want to walk you through the data structure of a project. First, you have the project as a whole. This is where you're going to define the master budget, the cost per hour, a lot of those high-level parameters, the client association. Then within that, you're going to have milestones, task lists, and individual tasks. So let's go through each of those kind of tab by tab. So I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to click into milestones. So we say we've got these 3 different milestones. I'm going to rename this one just planning stage. Grooming or planning stage just sounds a little funky. So here I have my milestones. These are not tasks. These are essentially phases of a particular project. So our planning stage is going to encompass many different things. Right? There can be multiple task lists and many different tasks within a particular milestone. So an important thing is you don't log time against a milestone. You don't check off that you've completed a milestone. These are really just a phase that contains subsets of work within them that we can track discretely, right? So we can see how are we doing on a particular milestone. The important thing is here, different milestones might be managed by different people. Different milestones might be running concurrently or separately. You might budget differently within each of them. So you can kind of group things out into these different milestones, again, just as that top level phase. Now, next, within a particular milestone, we can have one or many task lists. Task list from a data structure perspective is more of an organizational tool. So you don't really budget or track too much within a list itself. It really just helps you group up the many different tasks that might be involved into different subsections. So technically, you could get away without using task lists. You kind of have to use milestones and tasks. I do still recommend using the task list functionality purely just as an organizational tool, but do just keep in mind that it's really just like a folder or a bucket of tasks that are within a particular milestone. Last but not least, within a task list, we'll have many different tasks. These are the individual items, like we mentioned, where time is logged, statuses are tracked, notes are taken, clients are notified, right, based on those tasks being completed. So again, really at the end of the day, it's kind of like you've got a milestone, you have one to multiple task lists, and then you have many tasks underneath those, all just nestled into that hierarchical structure. Now, from there, let's start thinking about how this actually goes in practice. So we've got all these different things. You can see here that inherently some of these kind of lean into each other. And so what is really important to do as we're setting up a new project is define out our task dependencies, right? And a lot of this stuff works based on a few key fields. So we've got our different tasks. Over to the right, we can see the start after and duration, right? So that the start after and duration basically determines when something shows up on our Gantt chart and how long it's going to take us to do. So in this case, as I'm looking at this, I might go, hey, why are we starting this 13 days? This is the first task. We're waiting 13 days to get started, right? I'm like, I don't like that, right? I'm going to go ahead and back this up. Let's start immediately. So now we're basically starting at the same point that our milestone kicks off. Now, let's also keep going down this pipeline, right? So we've got a blueprint handoff or sign off and then a project agreement sign off. Well, we can't really get a project sign off until the blueprint is done. So what I might do is click here on the right, this little dot, and connect these. So what I've just done is create a dependency between these two tasks. So if I were to open up my blueprint task, essentially task 1, and look at our dependency section, we'll now see that I have a successor with a dependency type of FS. Now, what is FS? FS is finish to start. What that means is that I have to finish task 1 before I start task 2. Now, these are really helpful tools for a few different reasons. One, if I'm to end up behind on a certain task, the successor task will move automatically. Same if I'm ahead, right? If I end up ahead on this task, the other one should move automatically, right? So let's say it only took us 4 days or 3 days instead of our initial estimate of 5. The next task actually will move up its start date accordingly so that I'm not just sitting there twiddling my thumbs, kind of waiting for that next action. The other thing that is really valuable about those dependencies is that we can actually use them as a part of our custom views, right? So if I were to come into, let's say, my task list, again, jumping out of my template here, but let's say I wanted to create a view of tasks that I can actually start on. Because keep in mind, if we jump over, I know I'm jumping around a little, I promise I'll drive home this idea. If we look at our template here, lots of these are set to open, right? Lots of open tasks. And if I go into my task list and I were to just create a view that says status is open, well, this second task, even though it's dependent on the first and we shouldn't actually start it, it's going to show up, right? Because it's an open task. So instead, I can actually come in and say, hey, status needs to be open and dependency status has to be independent tasks, or what I'll oftentimes do is not blocking waiting for tasks, right? Basically meaning that actually or just waiting for tasks. Looking at the fact that, hey, this task is not waiting for another task to be completed, right? An inverse of this would kind of be like saying something that's really high priority is something that's open and blocking other tasks, right? So basically the idea that this is a task where once we finish this, we can start on a bunch of other work. So those dependencies, they help you with the due date, start date management side, but they also help you with the prioritization of work because something might be looking like this is a common scenario. You might have this first task and many things depend on it being done, right? So I'm just kind of doing this as an example here. But we might have 3 or 4 tasks that are all just waiting to go, right? Based on this first one being completed. So back in our example of that custom view, this would be a blocking task. We want to get this done because once it's done, we can actually move on to all these other work items. All right, so really important to come in here. I normally kind of do it like this. I've got my little Gantt chart on the right, and then I've got my tasks on the left where I can come in and actually associate and plan them accordingly. One more important thing to do inside of our project, and you can do this task by task by opening up view, or you can just come over to the right and look at our work hours. these work hours are an estimate, right? So when we're setting them in a project, we're kind of looking at what do we think it's going to take, right? So this is an opportunity to pull some data about previous projects and actually get a realistic idea of like, what does it look like, right? How long does it take us to write up a project scope? How long does it take us to implement a script that looks like this, right? And so we're coming in and we're setting these estimated work hours so that we can actually track against them from a budget management perspective, as well as from a workload management perspective, right? If I only have one employee who handles these 4 tasks and I'm kicking off, let's say 10 projects next month that we're all going to need these done, I need to know that, right? Because, hey, maybe I need to make sure that no one else is bothering them because they're really busy, getting these things done for our active client projects. So again, that's really the process for making a template. You're going task by task, you're putting in that estimate of work hours, and then you're determining what types of things block or depend on each other so that I can make sure that they're prioritized and that they're related via our task dependencies. From there, once you're ready to actually launch that project, again, you'll just go into projects, into active projects, click on new, and then use that template that you've just created to launch a new project. Last thing I will highlight here, when you actually start to launch them, you'll choose a start date. This becomes day 0, right? So in my actual template, all of those start after days, they're not based on the date it was created because you might create a project that you're going to start in the future. All of those, like it's mentioning here, are going to be based on that project start date and will dynamically kind of fill themselves in based on whatever you're doing as the start date of a project. Now, last but not least, let's jump into some of the core settings as well as workflow and automation. So up in the top right under our setup tab is where a lot of the good stuff lives. Under personal preferences, this is like the basics, right? Do you want dark mode or light mode? What's your color? Do you want an icon? All that good stuff. You can make some choices about notifications. I do always like to highlight there's kind of 2 notification tabs. One is for personal notifications. The other is to set the default for personal notifications. So if you want notifications turned off by default, you would go in, you turn all these off, right? But if I go back to my personal settings, they're still going to be on, right? So I'd have to turn them off here as well. This just gets into the preference of your particular users and how they'd like to be notified about different task updates. Inside of the portal configuration, there are a few pretty important ones. Business days is surprisingly important. So if you're using those task dependencies and you're moving tasks around, business days should actually be excluded from those, right? We don't want to have a task with a start date of Sunday, right? Because that's not real and it's going to throw off our expectations. So we do always want to come in and set up our business days. Project budgets, this is where we can set some of our defaults, right? So do we want to look at completion as tasks and issues or more based on like an hours type of math? We can look at our default budget options, right? So how do we like to look at things? Do we track on revenue or cost? Do I want some notifications if budgets are starting to go a little bit wild? We can also jump into our task and timesheet settings. These ones here at the bottom, I know I'm going quick. A lot of these people just leave as default. You can go through one by one and make sure. I like to highlight some of the most important ones. Org level task dependencies. Big. Make sure to come in here. So this basically means, hey, if I move up a predecessor, should I ship the successor up? Yes, most of the time you should. If a due date of a predecessor is extended, should I shift the successor back? Yes, right? If we're going to be late on task 1, we're going to be late on task 2, right? Unless we like crank it out, right? And get way ahead of schedule. And then if I were to complete a predecessor early, do I want to update the successor? Probably, right? Now, not in all cases. Maybe a successor task is, you're building a home, right? And you're waiting for the lumber. And it's like, hey, just because we finish the blueprint doesn't mean we can start, right? We're not getting that lumber until April 20th, right? So we have to wait. Most of the time, if you're in more of a service space, all of these would be on. If you're in more of a space where there's a lot of physical goods that need to make it to actually be on site, you'll want to think about these a little bit more granularly. Under time log settings, a few important ones here. Really, one of the big ones is time log user restriction up at the top. There's another one people get stuck on all the time. So you'll have a primary task owner. If I have the setting like this, their manager can't log time on that task. Only the person who owns it can. So a lot of the times you'll do this anyone in project just because like, hey, you know what? Jim ended up helping with this. He needs to log his time. He's technically not the task owner, but he's obviously helping out with this project. So important one there. Rest of these are really just settings about when time can and cannot be logged against a particular project. Next up into project configuration. These are actually for each project, right? So if you did want to have specific dependency settings that are unique to a project, right? So maybe I do some software development and some home building. It's kind of a weird business model. I could actually set these as different for each of my projects. Under customization, we can actually create task list templates. I don't recommend you do this. The main reason that I don't recommend task list templates is because you can't set dependencies in them, right? So they kind of just aren't that useful because really, again, the big part of why you're using projects is probably because you have task dependencies. Otherwise, you'd be using something simpler. So I normally don't really recommend using task list templates. Under modules, you can do any of your naming. So some people will change issues to bugs, milestones to phases, right? Things like that. And then within each of my different modules and fields, I can set up different options and fields. So if I want to come in and say, hey, I'm going to change the layout. I want to add an extra pick list, right? This is all of your field customization options, just living under the layouts and fields section. Now, next two tabs are really similar. They're just based on different records. So project automation and task automation, these are basically structured if-then statements that allow you to automate a thing. I'm going to show you the creation of a task workflow rule because that's more common. A project workflow rule would basically be like on creation, on completion of a project. Tasks are a place where you see things get a lot more granular. So let's go into workflow rules. Let's go into new workflow rule. Let's set up notification on due date if open, right? So let's say, hey, based on a date, we're going to say within a task, based on the due date, let's say once, and you could do like, 1 day after the due date, right? Whatever you might want. I'm going to say on the due date. If the status of that task is not closed, right? So, hey, supposed to be done today, not done today. Let's do something about it, right? I'm not going to create an email template here. You can create a custom template. I'm just going to grab one of the existing ones, send an email, right? So this is basically as simple as on the due date of a task, if the task is open, somebody needs to know about it, right? So you can come in here and essentially set up an email notification that goes to a particular person. A quick insight on how to set those up. Under email alerts, I can add an email alert that goes to an owner, a team, the manager of a project, right? Just based on one of those particular triggers. Issue tracker, again, are just a bunch of those same types of settings, but specifically for issues rather than tasks or projects. They split these out because not everyone really uses issues that heavily, so not everybody needs it. Under the marketplace, you're able to install a ton of different extensions for Zoho projects. A lot of the default ones for Zoho apps are going to live under the Zoho app section. Big surprise. I like to call attention to Zoho CRM. Using this, you can actually launch projects from a CRM account and deal record. I also like to highlight Zoho Desk. This allows you to convert any particular ticket in Desk into an issue in Zoho Projects, kind of just allowing you to do that handoff in a really streamlined and easy way. And then also Zoho Invoice and Books. This is where it'll allow you to roll up all of that billable time and actually send invoices out to your clients directly through Zoho Projects. Under developer space is where you can add custom functions, extensions, connections, all that good stuff. Custom functions, kind of the main one here, just writing these out in Deluge to complete more complicated actions that are difficult to do without Deluge. Data administration, give you an insight into storage. You've got plenty. You're very unlikely to hit that limit. We do have a couple pre-baked integrations from things like Basecamp, Jira, or other file types, so Microsoft project files. This is for your migration over to projects. I will always highlight any project management tool, migrations are going to be extra painful. A lot of people do choose to just finish the existing projects in the old tool and pick up the new ones in the new tool. Obviously, if your project lifecycle is very long, that becomes more painful, right? So you have to figure out what's going to make the most sense for you. You can pull backups every 24 hours. And then, of course, you've got a full audit log of every single thing that's happened here, right? So even just me recording this video, we can see tons of different updates and changes that have been going on as I've been going through the process. Sandbox, if you do want to create a sandbox inside of Zoho Projects so that you can break things and not piss anyone off, you can do that right here. Save yourself the pain and suffering of a badly thought through update and try it in the sandbox first. I will tell you, I've been doing software configuration for a long time. I still like using sandboxes whenever I can because it's just easy to make an error, or it's easy to have an idea, show it to a team member, and then they go, oh, no, that's all wrong. And you go, interesting. But if you've done it in the sandbox, you haven't really pissed anyone off because it's not going to affect anybody's day-to-day. Now, under Manage Users, I will just quickly highlight, you've got portal users. These would be like your employees. You've got client users, which would be like a client that you want to add to the system. And then you've got teams, which are groups of people that can be associated with a task. Again, these are internal. And then you've got resources, which are essentially a one-off thing, right? So you've got a buzzsaw, you've got a server rack, right? And you want to allocate that resource to a project. You can do that here. Profiles and roles are pretty funny inside of Zoho Projects because a role doesn't really do anything. It's kind of just a name. It's a name of a thing that you can associate to a user. It confers no rights. It confers no meaning. It's really just a label. The other ones that actually matter are profiles. So within a particular profile, let's say we want to add a new one. There's going to be for a user. We can come in and set their permissions for accessing really anything that we want, right? So just based on their profile settings, we can give them access to projects, milestones, task lists, based on view, add, edit, delete, and also based on things that they own versus everything across the entirety of the org. So if we were to go look at like a manager profile, we can see they've got access to some of the stuff, but they can't like delete a user, right? But they've got a lot of access to the modules, to the projects themselves, so that they're actually able to view and see what's going on across the system. So again, a lot of functionality there in the profiles that you want to kind of go row by row and make sure that you've set things up accordingly based on exactly what types of data you need your team to see and interact with. All right, so with that, I think we have wrapped here for today. We've gone through kind of the overview, the project templates, the structure of data, as well as a deep dive into a lot of those settings and automation tools that come with Zoho Projects. So as always, I really do hope that you found this video useful. If you did, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. That really helps us out, lets me know that I'm doing a good job and that you're finding it useful. Make sure to leave any video requests and questions down in the comment section below. We try to get through and respond to as many of those as we can every single week. And as always, my name is Tyler Colt, and I will see you next time.